Your evidence, I'll tell you why it's insufficient.
All you can say is that, oh,
let me have the right to respond.
All you can say is that, oh, Islam came 200 odd years later, right? And okay, Muhammad wanted to come up with some kind of religion. Oh, right, okay. The Muslims, we didn't have nothing, right? Christians and Jews, they've got a book. Oh, come on. I want to have a book as well. That's what he came up with. As he was going around from caravan to caravan, trading whatever, he's hearing stories, right? Let me give you a point. Even one thing, even inside the cave, right? Gabriel, that's what they say, talked to Muhammad. What proof did they got as Gabriel spoke? Why would he conflict two messages, right? Why? You know what I'm saying? Issues like that, we don't want to go into, right? So therefore, right, the foundation of Islam is just flawed, nothing. The building cannot even stand up, right? So therefore, the first revelation, a spirit itself, right, has to have a body to come into this existence, a spirit.
You're talking about the historical crucifixion, right? And you're doing all this waffling, right?
Exactly.
Fine.
We're finished now.
Now,
prove to me that Jesus didn't die.
So the evidence that you provided that he died was by someone called Matthew. You don't even know who Matthew was. You said he was a disciple. So I asked you a question.
Yeah.
Were the disciples of Christ literate people, highly literate in Greek or Hebrew, or were they ordinary fishermen, peasants?
Some of them fishermen, yeah. He was a tax collector, Matthew. John
was he honest?
John, come on, man. You know, you're boring me. You know that.
Listen. When you bring, listen.
You're boring me. Listen, you're boring me.
Listen. The reason why you cannot.
Do you want to tell you what colour his shoes was as well?
The reason why you cannot handle this is because it's too much over your head.
I'll
tell you what. I'll tell you. It's my turn to speak.
Because you ask stupid questions.
Let me tell you.
The question not intelligence.
Listen.
You're asking intelligent questions.
He wants
me to ask an intelligent question. Was Matthew honest?
Was this a difficult question? Okay, now. Listen, I'm going to be real. I'm going to give you a scenario. Imagine now. Listen, I'm answering.
You're asking unintelligent questions.
Listen, this gentleman comes along in a court of law and he says,
the Quran. This is not the Quran.
Listen,
we don't go by hereby saying.
Hear example is stupid, right?
It's quiz logic. It's silly.
In a court of law.
Silly logic.
No, listen. In a court of law.
That's what Islam believes.
Are you listening?
That's an Islamic. That's Islam. Don't bring that to Christianity. That doesn't work.
Have some decency.
It doesn't work. It's going to fall down.
Have some decency. And listen.
If you're going to come to the people of the book, as your Surah 4:47 says, if you want to learn something,
do you give me the right to
come to Christians. Surah 4, listen to me. Surah 4:47, it tells you as a Muslim, if you want to know something, right, come to us, people of the book.
It doesn't.
You will learn. It doesn't. Read it. Take out your Quran. Take out your Quran.
I will.
Take out your Quran.
Now here.
Listen, no.
Hello?
Take out your Quran. Take it out.
No, you tell me you are the one making the claim.
Read it.
You made the claim. You establish it. You establish your claim. You establish your claim. The owner is only the one who makes the claim to provide and substantiate with evidence.
Islam is a myth. That's all it is. It's a myth.
The whole world is
It's not a God. It's written by man.
People,
even your own scholars, right?
People need
What's
to
his
substantiate the claims if they make
are
it.
even rejecting it. Even all right.
Okay. Are you finished?
Let me ask you a question.
Are you finished?
Let me ask you a question.
Hang on. Are you
Out
finished?
of all the different Qurans you've got, right? Which Quran would you choose to write down?
What do you mean different Quran?
Which one?
What do you mean different Quran?
The Hafs Quran?
Hafs is the Quran.
The Jiri Quran?
Yeah.
The Wash Quran?
Yeah.
Which one would you, just those three alone I mentioned, which one would you take?
All of them.
Better say, all of them?
Yeah.
And they all say the same thing?
Pretty much so, yeah.
You see, pretty much.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Pretty much. You heard it from his mouth. No, hold on, wait. You heard it from his mouth, didn't Pretty much.
One second.
Pretty much. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I'm going off topic.
Right.
Sorry.
No,
sorry,
you're off topic.
Sorry.
So let's return to the subject matter. Right.
Sorry.
Thank you for acknowledging
Sorry.
that. Right. So what I'm saying is, if this gentleman came in a court of law as a witness, now the judge.
And what's the point you're trying to make?
I'm about to demonstrate that.
What's the point?
I'm about to demonstrate the point I'm making.
So I can follow
If you only listen.
Start from the foundation. What the point you trying to make?
Earlier on, I asked you, is Matthew honest?
Yeah.
The point I was trying to make.
To you, how am I supposed to know that?
Are you going to let me speak?
Right. So now you're going to demonstrate.
Are you going to let me speak?
Demonstrate.
Or are you going to interject?
Demonstrate.
Be a gentleman. Thank you. Right.
Demonstrate to me.
I am demonstrating if someone is going to stand forth as a witness, they need to be credible witness. Credibility of a witness has certain characteristics. This man has to be trustworthy, reliable, have a good character, have good memory. If, for example, he says, look, I saw with my... Are you listening? Imagine there was a murder happened, for example.
That's a poor example. Come on, man.
I need to finish the example.
Just wake up. Come on, get to the point.
If you allow me to finish, rather than making your own judgment, right?
It's a poor example.
So if this gentleman comes in a court of law and he says, I have seen it with my own eyes. Now, you know what the judge and the lawyers and jury will be establishing is? Does he have a good eyesight? Did he actually see it himself?
And what colour shoes?
Wait.
What colour shoes was he wearing?
Are you listening? So when a witness is presented to provide testimony and evidence for something,
I know what you're talking about.
No, you don't.
I wasn't born yesterday. So come on, get to the point.
Okay, so you understand what I'm saying, right?
And it doesn't make any sense relating to what we're talking about.
Is Matthew honest? Go on, provide the testimony that he was honest. Did he have good memory? Did he have good memory for what he's recollecting?
The Christian sources will probably say that.
Who is Matthew?
So now, you brought a witness called Matthew. You said he was a disciple, right? Fine. I'm going to examine Matthew. The reason why I am suspecting Matthew of dishonesty.
Who else did I say as well?
Wait. You said some historians which you keep not naming.
John.
Okay. Let's start with Matthew. Brothers. The reason why I suspect Matthew of dishonesty is not based on
dishonesty.
Allow me to finish.
I know Islam's come to reject the Bible.
Excuse me.
I understand that.
Allow me
what you're saying.
Allow me to express my view.
Right,
first.
you expressed it enough.
And
now.
then,
Now
I have not finished. Allow me to express my views.
I'm going to start.
Allow me to finish.
Our reason
Allow
why
me to-
Matthew is dishonest.
Why is he dishonest?
What's the reason?
Why is he dishonest?
Thank you. That's precisely what I was about to go next. But the reason why you interject...
Too much. Why is he...
Are you going to allow me to speak? Are you going to allow me to speak without interjecting?
But don't bore me. Okay, carry on.
If you're bored, that's your problem, not mine. Thank you. Now, Matthew's dishonesty, let me give you some examples of dishonesty. Are you listening?
He's not listening. You're boring me. I'm listening. You're literally boring me.
See you later. Anyone else wants to know Matthew's dishonesty?
No, I don't want to know. I take a different tack. Like, I'm not a Christian, as you know.
I know.
Okay,
I'm going to speak to this brother. Matthew's dishonesty.
Historically, kind of, there seems to be more evidence for a person called Jesus being crucified than him not being crucified.
All rumors.
Well, I know. Like,
And if you ask me, I will provide the evidence why this is a rumor.
But you could do the same thing about, like, I know. I
No,
could say
we're not talking
the
about.
Sahaba are all
We're not
rumors.
talking about the Sahaba. We're talking about the claim that is made. So Matthew makes a lot of statements, and you can actually decipher that he's making things up. He's lying, distorting, and inventing and fabricating historical information that is already of the past. For example, let me give you some examples. Matthew says, these are the generations, all of them are 14, from Abraham to David, David to the exile to Babylon, and then up to Jesus Christ, right? 14 generations. He says, these are all the generations. He counts them. 42 generations. But if you go into these people that he is giving you the genealogy of, he's missing out a lot of them in between.
What if that's a mistake?
No, not a mistake, deliberately. Now let me tell you why he's dishonest. The people that he misses, for example, he misses out Jehoiakim. Right? Jehoiakim. Matthew wants to present Jesus to be the son of David, to sit on the throne of David. So he gives you a genealogy of individuals which he considers to be giving you the right of heir for the throne of David. within this sequence of people within the genealogy, he takes out Jehoiakim. You might think it's not significant, like you said, it could be a mistake. But if you were to go and read the Old Testament, God says about Jehoiakim and his progeny that none of them will have anyone to sit on the throne of David. So God has already, what's it called, like withdrawn this right to claim the throne of David, anyone who comes from Jehoiakim and his progeny. So if you have Jehoiakim within this lineage, it is obviously clear that Jesus, from that genealogy, cannot claim to be the son of David and to be on the throne of David. It's shooting yourself on the foot. He omits this name. So when we examine this kind of, this is page number 1 of Matthew's Gospel, first page, that how dishonest he was with a theological motive of his dishonesty. And why do I say dishonesty? Because he is twisting historical information and saying these are only 14 generations when there are more than 14. This is from page 1. If you go into more and more examples, you'll realize how he's making things up. He's twisting and fabricating, and we've done that enough times. I mean, if you ask even Paul, for example, we've done it together, demonstrating Matthew's dishonesty of historical narration twisting and corrupting it. So, as a person who is presented this claim that Christ was crucified based on testimony of Matthew, I have all the reason to suspect that this man is not giving you the right information, because he is theologically biased. He is perhaps, ideologically biased from his own ideology that he holds, and various other biases that comes in. So to get actual information, I would say you have to take with a pinch of salt. So we don't discount history. We can use what we call methodological neutrality. Stand from that position and assess and see what the evidence presents to you. When we find this evidence, his credibility is in question. What else do we have? We have...
Aren't there secular sources?
Secular sources are late.
Yeah, aren't there like historians who are secular who still think that there's more evidence that
do you know
someone
why,
called Jesus was crucified?
Do you know why secular historians
Like,
believe in the death of Christ? Because of their supposed naturalism. Presupposition of naturalism. Because what happens is this. If you are alive now, you have to die. That's what the reality of experience of human beings and so on. They can't believe that God intervened and took it up in heaven.
No.
That is the bias of naturalism. That is why they will take those... Hang on. Let me finish, you can speak.
Okay.
That is why they would have no quarrel. They would have no quarrel in accepting these stories.
Okay, but like you're saying that these other historians have a bias of naturalism. That when you
modern historians,
okay, these modern historians have a bias of naturalism.
Other historians
so that
spread rumors.
they assume that people die. But the thing is though, like they wouldn't necessarily assume that someone died by crucifixion. The fact that they're sort of believing that someone was crucified, that kind of gives them reason to believe that this person would have died from crucifixion, because like what do you have more evidence for? We have lots of evidence of people being crucified and dying from crucifixion. We don't really have any other recorded pieces of evidence for us to believe that when people are crucified they get like teleported to heaven and then have someone replaced on the cross.
The Quran does actually say, whether or not you believe it's revelation, that it was made to appear that it was crucified. So in fact the Quran affirms that kind of understanding. It's not denying in that sense the appearance of crucifixion. It was made to appear that he was... It's denying in the majority view, although there is actually within the Islamic tradition different views on what the Quran actually says. It appears to be saying that he appeared to have died and that he wasn't. Now if one rejects any kind of datum from the divine, not just from the horizontal but from the vertical as well, as naturalistic historians do, then you're going to be left with that. But if you do actually believe there is datum from Revelation, then in a holistic understanding of life, the universe, and everything, you're going to take that into account. But Western historiography is consistently naturalist in its presuppositions. So it will exclude any datum that doesn't come from this worldly source. Now, you can do that. If they're Jews, if you want to do it, it's fine. But you don't have to have that view. And religious people choose not to do that. Okay, so Muslims and Christians believe that Jesus was born of a virgin. Ah, but you say, we've never ever heard of God bringing about a virgin birth before, therefore it didn't happen. Well, that's a philosophical assumption. It's actually a prejudice against the facts. Because the facts may be actually that divine did create a virgin birth, just so happens, on this one amazing, unique occasion.
Would it be fair to say what you're calling a bias is actually, also, you could also call empiricism?
It is empiricism.
Okay, yeah, so that means like believing in things based on evidence, and that's kind of a rational way to go about things. That's how we spend most of our lives.
But it's a methodological bias.
It's a methodological bias, and it's not, ultimately, you can't prove that only science, for example, is the only criterion of truth, because science can't tell you that. That is an assumption that you bring to the scientific method. Oh, this is the only truth we accept. Muslims and Christians and Jews say, well, there's truth in empiricism, but also there's other layers of dimensional truth which also feed into understanding of reality. So there's an assumption here, which is a philosophical one, which people are entitled not to accept.
Okay, I'm not going to assume that the world is entirely natural. I'm not going to say, this is how I'm going to start looking at the world. But for any given account of the supernatural, any given piece of scripture, I think it's reasonable to ask what are the reasons to believe that this scripture really is from God rather than a product of man. And so if a piece of scripture is making some claims about things that happened hundreds of years before that piece of scripture was formed or brought into the world, and also the claims of that piece of scripture sort of contradict earlier sources, then we would need to first establish that this piece of scripture, that there is some reason to believe that this piece of scripture is from God.
Everything you said, I completely agree with. The problem is that the Gospel of Matthew, if we're talking about that Gospel of Matthew, does not claim to be scripture, revelation, inspired by God, given by. It doesn't claim any of that.
Yeah,
neither does anything, with the possible exception of the last book of the Bible, claim to be inspired by God. So we're not dealing with something that the author of Matthew thought was scripture, or indeed anyone of his contemporaries thought was scripture. Only much later generations decided, now we're now going to give it that canonical status as the inspired word of God. It doesn't claim that. Now Muslims may claim that their scripture, it does claim to be scripture and inspired. So you're dealing with apples and oranges, like and unlike here. You can't equate a man-made text that doesn't claim to be scripture with revelation that does claim to be. You're dealing with different categories.
I wasn't trying to claim that the book of Matthew was
doesn't
scripture.
claim to be scripture.
I wasn't trying to make that claim. But I mean, so let's try and get back to the original point. I sort of feel that historically there are kind of secular historians, by which I mean kind of people who aren't sort of Christian in their worldview. But there's still historians who think that historically there's more reason to believe that someone called Jesus was crucified. And I think one of the sources
because that's what they have. The rumors,
I think one of the sources they use to infer that is I think Josephus. I've heard this name being brought forward.
Josephus wasn't a witness of the apparent crucifixion anyway. I mean, he was became a Roman historian. He lived in Rome. He wasn't a witness.
If he's recording this account, then doesn't that mean that the account was in circulation at the time?
According to the Quran, if you were there, according to the Quran, just to run with this argument for a second, say you were there in AD 30, and according to the Quran, what would you have seen? According to the Quranic narrative about the crucifixion of Jesus, what would you have seen according to the Quran?
It was made to appear. That's what
so would you have seen the crucifixion or not, according to the Quran?
Yeah, crucifixion.
Right. What do historians, centuries, thousands of years later, what do they record?
The crucifixion.
Exactly. So the Quranic narrative actually endorses that perspective in some kind of weird way. You see what I mean?
But it means though that the only reason to believe that Quran narrative is if you have reason to believe that the Quran is from God.
That's my position. It may not be a position of other people, but that's my position.
So is there any reason to believe that Jesus was not crucified other than if you believe that the Quran is from God?
Remember the gentleman I spoke to earlier, I said this part A and part B to the question.
Right.
Part A was that Quran is the divine revelation
And it
is the source of ultimate truth, right? But of course, he doesn't agree with that, divine revelation. But in principle, he agrees divine revelation should be the source of ultimate truth. But then I moved on saying, the evidence that is presented that someone was crucified is at best a well-attested rumor. That is what the Quran is saying. People perceive, they have this perception a crucifixion took place and Jesus was crucified. And the Quran then immediately afterwards says he wasn't killed or crucified, but God took him up. So the perception was there, which led the rumor of the people and the historians to narrate this information, but a miraculous thing happened, that God saved him. That is why it is unique that God, knowing that this perception was
there were
around...
some early Christians, by the way, who didn't think Jesus was crucified. There were some Christians in the first century who didn't think, you might not know this, but
I think I've heard of that.
the Basilides, as they're known by patristic scholars, were a group of Christians who didn't believe Jesus of Nazareth was crucified. So it's actually even wrong to say all Christians believe Jesus was crucified. I'm not saying that's evidence for the non-crucifixion of Jesus, just saying that some persecution didn't believe Jesus was crucified. They believe someone else was. Simon and Cyrene.
Do you think, on balance, there's more? Is there more evidence supporting that a crucifixion took place that the people around thought was of Jesus?
If I was a secular historian, obviously within that limitation of the appearance of the crucifixion, I would go with that.
Okay.
I mean, it depends how you're coming at this issue and what you limit your frames of reference to. If you go purely secular to the appearance, then you're going to conclude, of course, as a naturalist, that Jesus must have been crucified. If you have other data from other sources which are even more reliable, which is the Muslim argument, then of course you're going to accept that. You're going to upgrade your credibility to something more solid.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So
it's a matter of faith. It's a matter of faith. Do you believe the Quran? That's how I say. Do you believe the Quran is the word of God or not? Now you're an atheist, by the way. So we should be discussing. Are you an agnostic?
Yeah. I totally.
You've moved along to a bit more. That's good.
Okay. Well, whatever. Sure.
Last time we 2 weeks ago.
That is a development. That is an internal development, right?
I mean, I've always been of the opinion that, I'm not sure whether or not God exists. So maybe some people say atheism is a lack of belief in God. So if you don't take a position, that would kind of be an atheist according to some people, even though the original meaning of atheist was disbelieving in God. But I mean, it can get a bit confused, the terminology these days.
But if you're in a position where you don't know possibility exists, that God exists, there's a possibility, then that's not atheism, that's agnosticism.
Sure.
That is a strong move forward compared to a total rejection of God, which is like a positive claim that God doesn't exist in atheism.
Yeah.
So this is a step that we can discuss further on these issues to demonstrate.
Cameraman for this. Hashim was calling.
Okay, I'll be there shortly. Nice speaking to you and to you.
Yeah, nice speaking to you as well.
Unfortunately, the gentleman couldn't carry on the conversation.